Would you welcome Professor John Heffner?
Thank you very much. It's certainly good to be here with you. It's a large group tonight. I'm gratified by that. The other day I was thinking about my life and how blessed I am and how grateful I am to God for His blessings that are so terribly undeserved on my end. And I was just kind of blown away about it, and I thought about those people that didn't share that same feeling about their own life when they looked at it, that rather were enemies of God and fighting against Him, and even their career path has pitted them against the Lord's clear teaching in Scripture in Genesis and other places that He is in fact the Creator. And He claims to be the Creator. And I just believe God. I don't think He'll tell you the truth on one page and lie to you on another page. And so I was thinking about those that are in a career path of evolutionary teaching, the paleontology professors of the world, the geology professors. Many of them are basically in a war against God, and the biologists, many of them are, and many of the fields of science. And I thought, that must be a tough existence. And I began to kind of go down that path and think about how tough it would be to be an evolutionist. Now, one of the problems they have is the deck is stacked against them. Science is getting pretty good in many cases, and we're finding things and uncovering things that are making it harder and harder to prop up that tired old 18th century Darwinian doctrine of evolutionism. And so I thought I'd play a little David Letterman, like top 10 reasons this happens and so on that late night show, And so I'm not going to be throwing cards out in the audience, but I want to show you 10 reasons, only 10 tonight in the interest of time. 10 reasons, in my opinion, it is tough being an evolutionist these days. Reason number 10, are you ready? You got to believe, if you're going to be an evolutionist, then there's a number of things that you must believe. It's not unlike joining a church and you would be presented in a new members class. This is what we believe. This is what we stand for. And if you align yourself with us, we'd love to have you. But if you can't do this and you're not in agreement with us, well, then this church is not for you. Or this civic club is not for you. Or this Boy Scout creed is not for you. Or whatever it is you're trying to join. Well, these guys, men and women, are in this club. And if you're going to stay in good standing with the club, you can't go off the reservation on any of these things I'm about to show you. And one of them is you got to believe in the Big Bang and its ability to form the universe, including the stars, and ultimately life itself, despite increasing rejection by knowledgeable scholars. You got to believe you can trace your family tree all the way back through your nearest ancestor. We're going to go backwards here according to them. Okay, apes, through fish, through worms, yes, they believe that, through pond scum, all the way back to rocks, all the way back to, hydrogen gas from a Big Bang. Well, how's that standing in real science? Well, right here, Robert Hazen, writing an article in the Genesis, Rocks, Minerals, and the Geochemical Origin of Life in Elements magazine in June of 2005, says this: rocks and minerals must have played a pivotal role in the transition from the blasted prebiotic, before life, prebiotic earth to the living world we now inhabit. Really. Dr. Henry Morris says, the prophet Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, preached that those people of Israel who had abandoned God to worship some pagan idol ought to be deeply ashamed. Basically, and now 7, that says, saying to a tree, you are my father, and to a stone, you gave birth to me. Wow, I find it incredible that the ancient scriptures, written hundreds of years BC, predicted as much. There'll come a time where people think they came from a stone. So hypothetically, you should be able to trace your ancestry back through all those things, and pond scum, worms, and all that, to a particular rock where that rain washed some minerals out that started you. That started you. And I find that ridiculous. I find it ridiculous. And so that's why I think it's tough. But let's read some more. Bucking the Big Bang article in New Scientist magazine, May of 2004. The Big Bang relies on things we've never observed. Now, isn't it true that real science depends on observation? You got to look at it. You got to be able to see it and repeat it. In our cabin room, we were talking, Jackson and I were this afternoon. He says, the theory of the law of gravity is easily testable. He's tossing a pillow up and down. It's coming down every time. It never did just stay up there. And so you test it and you observe it. Things we've never observed: inflation, dark matter, dark energy. These are terms you'll hear if you read these Big Bang articles. But the Big Bang can't, in dark energy, the Big Bang can't survive without these fudge factors. That's what he's calling it in the magazine. It's not my words. The Big Bang Theory can boast no quantitative predictions that have subsequently been validated by observation. I'd say it's in trouble then. Young scientists learn to remain silent if they have something negative to say about the standard Big Bang model. You just don't say anything about it, because they're hanging on to it, and it probably not be until that generation dies off that the new young astronomers and so on can get a more current, up-to-date theory going. I think it's time that scientists moved out of the 1800s and moved into 21st century reality myself. Now I'm in my den there, and I want you to know not all scientists believe that. I'm holding a string of 17 single-space typewritten pages of over 700 PhD scientists trained at secular universities that are saying, we have problems with Darwinian evolution. We are not buying it. We're not in good standing with the team or the club, and we're okay with that. And you can go to this website, discovery.org, and get that same list if you'd like for it. Dr. Charles Jackson, a friend of the museum who's spoken here several times, he says this: the whole theory of stellar evolution is quite deeply in the realm of the deeply hypothetical and based upon assumption, upon assumption, upon assumption. These guys are awesome in their ever-continuing faith in the face of all data and calculations. It reminds me of what Will Rogers said. He said, scientists get bigger and bigger reputations the more they talk about things you just can't check on. It seems to be true, doesn't it? Oh, and then Dr. Dwayne Gish, that famous statement, isn't it unbelievable what the unbeliever has to believe in order to remain an unbeliever? It's just unbelievable.
That was good.
Reason number 9. You got to believe stars formed by gravitational attraction of space gas particles. They believe, those that are drunk the Kool-Aid, they're in the evolution club, they believe that the Big Bang created a lot of dust and particles and so forth, and that those naturally have a gravitational attraction, and they do. And that's what formed the stars. They all started kind of centering, coming in around certain particles, I guess, and over millions, billions of years, which they're madly in love with that deep time, that you form a star. Well, it sounds reasonable enough if you don't tell the whole story. But Science News, March of '06, says the known laws of physics and chemistry say that the more gravity tries to squeeze gas particles together, the more heat will be generated, and I put in there like a diesel engine. How many of you know that diesel engines don't even have spark plugs? They don't need them because the compression ratio is so great that those particles are being forced together, and they're hitting each other and making so much friction and all that kind of stuff that it's hot enough to explode that diesel fuel, and they don't need a spark plug. This extra heat causes expansion of the particles outward, doesn't pull them inward, and the outward force is 400 times stronger than the attractive force. So they have an unrealistic mechanism. And what about star formation anyway? Astronomers estimate that there are 100 billion galaxies. I think they probably are right. We have a big God. They estimate that there's 200 billion stars per galaxy. I wouldn't be surprised if they're right on that too. Astronomers claim the universe is 20 billion years old. I have a little problem with that. But that would be 6.3 times 10 to the 17th power of seconds. Now that's a lot of years, 20 billion years. A billion is a million million. And a lot of seconds in there, well, this comes out 10 to the 17th. You might think it'd be a bigger number. Exponents are so very powerful that you don't need any more than that. Well, let's read on. And so let's do the math here. As a mathematician, you know you're going to get that math lesson. So 100 billion galaxies times 200 billion, that's 2 times 10 to the 22nd power. And dividing by those 6.3 times 10 to the 17th power seconds gives you 3.1746. Do you know what that means? That's times 10 to the 4th, by the way. That means that 31,746 stars per second would have to have formed every second for 20 billion years. And the point is simply this: we've never seen even one star form We've seen them die, but we haven't seen them form. In Genesis 1:16, almost as a parenthetical expression, it says, oh, and he made the stars also. Oh, by the way, he made 10 to the 22nd power of stars. Wow, amazing. How tough it is to be an evolutionist these days. Reason number 8 is language. We didn't know it until lunch today, but we have got a superstar linguist in our audience tonight. And Professor Klein is a Hebrew scholar in I don't know how many languages, but we saw his book today. He's written 20-something books. You don't know who's in your group sometime, do you? And I was telling somebody, in fact, a little couple is coming tomorrow. I said, one of the great things about the dig every year is who you meet. And we pour into each other's lives. Well, anyway, language, instead of evolving, language devolves. If man evolved from less intelligent creatures, we'd expect the earliest languages to be the least complex. The exact opposite is true. Early languages are much more complex in verb usage and syntax. For example, ancient Greek and ancient Chinese are much more complex than their modern counterparts. Ancient Sanskrit goes back to 1500 BC, and each verb had up to 500 variations. And here's Sanskrit and hieroglyphics. And here is a young lady that was in my class a couple years ago from China. Yuchen Du is her name. And did you know that the Chinese symbols for large ship is a combination of 3 others, boat plus 8 people? Large ship means boat plus 8 people. Boy, that sounds like the flood story in Noah's Ark, doesn't it? And so we see that embedded in these ancient languages oftentimes is a confirmation of Scripture. Reason number 7, design is everywhere. A few examples. We have just the right amount of gravity on Earth. We have a sun that is gigantic, but it's a controlled source of light and heat. The magnetic field, the Van Allen radiation belts, the ozone layer to protect life, liquid water, which is the basis of every system, underground aquifers, capillary action of plants, taking moisture and nutrients all the way up those trunks and all the way out to these little sub-branches and sub-branches to a particular leaf. Medicinal plants like digitalis, yew, aloe, and penicillin mold. We find design in plants in the seeds. And the Scripture says in Genesis 1:12, the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself. Scientists cannot even make a seed. It's a factory that takes dirt, water, and sunlight and produces food. Synthesis from that dirt, water, and sunlight is amazing. And look at the bombardier beetle. It's a very complex, complicated little guy. He's irreducibly complex. You know what that means, don't you? He couldn't have evolved piecemeal because those parts wouldn't have worked unless everything else was there. And he has 2 chambers. He has 28% hydrogen peroxide, which is much higher than your Walmart stuff, I believe. Much more of a catalyst. And you've got catalysts, you've got inhibitors, you've got a rotating nozzle, firing mechanism, and all the know-how to operate his equipment. And 2 chambers in his body, one for hydrogen peroxide, one for hydroquinone, along with the catalyst and inhibitor, reaction chambers, aiming, firing nozzle. And given the explosive nature of these chemicals, as well as the complicated sequence of events of their use, how can evolution maintain that this is a product of random chemical accidents? If this was the true path, then bombardier beetles would have blown themselves up many times and never passed their expertise on to the next generation. An honest observer, scientist, layperson would likely say this is more likely the result of a good design by a masterful designer. And I say amen. And other examples, dolphin sonar. Don't have time to go into all of the intricacies. Electric eels. You know how many volts an electric eel can generate? Up to 650? I had read something on that order. Water squirting archerfish that live in the water, and they must understand light's refraction. That insect on the branch is not really where they think it is. You know, when you put a straight stick into a pond, it appears to bend. That's light's refraction. He understands that. He knows the trigonometry necessary and the angle of refraction and all of that to make his shot and knock that little bug down in the water and eat him. Bacteria that, a fish that goes fishing with a lighted lure, bacteria that consumes toxic waste, whales that can dive down 7/10 of a mile, camels which can go 3 months without water, turtle shells, hollow hair of polar bears, changeable color of chameleons, giraffes' blood pressure controls when he bends down and raises up, organizations of herds, packs, families, nest-weaving birds, beaver dams, honeycombs. Humans have fingerprints, eyes, 130 million light-sensitive rods and cones on the retina. Eyes have automatic aiming, automatic focus, automatic maintenance. The blood clotting process, over 20 chemical actions have to occur. Sense of taste, smell, sight, hearing, touch, sexual reproduction. DNA, the human brain, has conscious thought, creates music, enjoys music, is moved by music, language, etc. The point is, design always points to a designer. And some of these things that I wanted you to see, the dolphin sonar, the electric eels, 500 plus volts, whales that can dive 7/10 of a mile, organized ants, we're going to be talking about that tomorrow night, spider webs and their navigation, firefly light, and 17-year cicada, the hook and barbules of feather design, falcon wings, eagle wings, one for diving, one for soaring, hummingbird wings, the archer fish that squirts the water we talked about, the water strider that takes advantage of surface tension on water. I mean, for the honest person that's looking at nature and wondering about it, and everybody's fascinated with it. I mean, the flaming atheists, they still love the Nature Channel. We're all fascinated with it, you know, but they just don't give God the credit. Polar bears have hollow hair. That's not a roll of toilet paper over there. That's a microscopic view of one hair. And they are hollow, meaning better insulation. Who thinks of that? Oh, yeah, the designer. He thinks of that. Water storage hump for camels, anglerfish with a lighted lure, honeycombs, little hexagonal shapes, very efficient shape, robin's nest of eggs. I don't know how a bird makes a nest with no thumbs. You know, okay, here's a fork. Build me a nest in that and just use tweezers. That'll simulate the bird's beak. Do you think you could build a nest? All right, I'm going to put this little piece of broom straw right here. Now, don't blow away. I'm going to go get another one and then curve it around. Now, stay curved, you know. I don't know how they do that with that little tweezer of a beak they have. Well, reason number 6. The fossil record is a hostile witness for evolution. The absence of transitional forms has got to be an embarrassment to the evolutionists. You know, if evolution were true, the fossil record should be mostly those in-between kinds. It's not a missing link, it's a missing chain. It's a misnomer when they say we're looking for that missing link. And we find, for example, fossils of lizards, we find fossils of birds, and if birds evolved from these lizards or these reptiles or dinosaurs, then there ought to be a lot of in-between kinds. There's a picture coming up. And in fact, Stephen Gould, the late professor of paleontology at Harvard, said this: the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record is the trade secret of paleontologists. Evolution requires transitional forms, and paleontology does not provide them. Dr. David Kitts at OU. You see, if it's true, then, you know, we have the full-blown lizard, 100% lizard, and we have 100% bird. And if that evolved up into birds, which they adamantly believe, they adamantly do believe that, then this ought to be the 80% lizard, 20% bird. And this ought to be the 70-30 creature. And this ought to be the 60-40 and the 50-50 and the 40-60 and the 30-70 and so on, all the way up till we get 100% bird. Well, we don't have those. When you look at fossils, we find fully formed lizards, fully functional, fully formed birds, fully functional, nothing in between. And it can't be said, well, we just hadn't looked long enough yet. Oh, yeah, we have. Darwin said, I know I don't have much evidence, but you just wait. The next 100 years, the fossil record will prove me to be right. It hasn't. No rep birds have been found. Stephen Gould speaking, he says, we have sought to impose a pattern that we hope to find on a world that doesn't really display it. In other words, this is what we wish we were finding, but we got to be honest, we don't find that. True science is always biblical. Reason number 5 is tough being an evolutionist these days. You got to believe in spontaneous generation. That means it just did it on its own. The idea that non-living chemicals just sprang to life in some ancient little pond. How likely is it that DNA, RNA, amino acids, proteins, etc. formed on their own? It's been called an inverted fantasy. A quote from Evolution, A Theory in Crisis by Dr. Michael Denton says this: instead of revealing a multitude of transitional forms through which the evolution of the cell might have occurred, Molecular biology has served only to emphasize the enormity of the gap. We don't have a clue how it could have done that. In reality, I think chemistry is not our ancestor, it's our problem. These are my words. At death, chemistry begins to break down that organism into simpler compounds, not reassemble those elements and create life again. And I guess a good experiment would be to kill that mosquito, and now we've got all the cell structure, got the right percentages of the right proteins and the cytoplasm and the DNA and the RNA. All I got to do is just bring him back to life. And he can't be very dead. Just a couple seconds ago. Let's get, anybody got a flashlight battery and 2 paper clips, and we'll see if we can electrode him or something and get him come back to life if it's all that easy. No, what happens at death is chemistry begins to break it down immediately and not build it up. It's time for scientists to leave 19th century thinking and move into 21st century reality. Reason number 4, it's got to be tough being an evolutionist these days, is soft tissue in dinosaur bones and other animals keeps showing up. That has got to be their worst nightmare. I bet they toss and turn at night, wishing they could somehow suppress all those pictures online of soft, bloody-looking marrow and stuff like that that could not possibly be 65 million, 200 million, or whatever numbers they're throwing around. For soft tissue to stay soft and pliable for millions of years is impossible, and they know it. Decay should have set in centuries ago. There's no way it should have lasted 65 million years. They have to constantly change their story, and they're okay with that as long as you don't question evolution itself. We can change our story, but don't question evolution. This is what they're seeing. This is what they're seeing. Today's Science, April of 05, lucky break, T-Rex bone yields soft tissue. T-Rex tissue is flexible and returns to its original shape after being stretched. And tissue from a T-Rex femur after being air dried, and fibrous demineralized bone. Here's a great quote from Mary Schweitzer at Montana State University. I'm quite aware that according to conventional wisdom and models of fossilization, these structures aren't supposed to be there. But there they are. I was pretty shocked. I guess so. The Montana T-Rex remains, this is from the CNN web, remains reveal blood vessels you could stretch. Tissues were soft and transparent and could be manipulated. This is pretty exciting stuff, the curator of the Smithsonian said. Do you believe he's telling the truth? I don't think that's the word he would use in private. Oh, gee, this is great. This is exciting. He said, guys, we got a problem. I'm going to spin it like it's exciting, and we're all into it. But this is terrible. May lead scientists to re-examine their theories of fossilization. You see, not evolution. We're not going to question evolution. We're just going to question fossilization. Deputy editor of Science magazine says soft tissues are rare in older finds. That's why in a 70 million year old fossil. It's so interesting. It's so bad news for them. The creationist viewpoint, instead of questioning their evolutionary thinking, they're trying to figure out a way for fossilization to preserve soft tissue for 70 million years. And I've seen some of what they're trying to do and scramble around and say the hemoglobin makes it delay its decay and all this and all that. Well, here's Mary Schweitzer. You just saw her quote. And she said, well, let me say that in a minute. I want you to get her quote. Translucent blood vessels, by all the rules of paleontology, should have long since drained from the bones. It's a matter of faith among scientists that soft tissue can survive at most for a few tens of thousands of years, not the 65 million years since T-Rex walked what is now the Hell Creek Formation in Montana. Now, I think she's pretty fair-minded, especially for someone who has gotten nothing but evolutionary viewpoint, as far as I know, for her whole lifetime. And she says, I had one reviewer tell me he didn't care what the data said, that he knew that what I was finding just wasn't possible. I wrote back and said, well, what data would convince you? And he said, none. Okay, well, I've heard that before. Don't confuse me with facts. My mind's made up. And it's not just dinosaurs. I want y'all to know that. I could not believe how many scientists have been sitting, hiding this information. They have found soft tissue in other animals. For example, recently evolutionary scientists, we call them EVOs for short, have confessed to soft tissues in other animal fossils they have found. They've been holding this, but they love publicity and they love funding, and this is likely to bring both. Well, I got 10 million year old frog marrow from this website. Here's another scientist. I got 400,000-year-old cave bear DNA. There's the website. I got 90-million-year-old Santana raptor muscle tissue. Yeah, well, I've got 300-million-year-old mammoth connective tissue. Well, I got Neanderthal DNA and so on. And you see what I mean? They're coming out of the woodworks because they see the publicity and all of that. Well, why does it matter? Biochemical kinetic laws say proteins can't last even 40,000 years. Evolutionists ignore science laws and just say Schweitzer's work is just showing us we really don't understand decay. Yeah, we do. It rots. There's lots of really basic stuff in nature that people just make assumptions about and yelling, y'all are the worst. So which should we trust? The known laws of science. This is Dr. Jackson saying this. All right, so which should we trust? The known laws of science are the assumptions that evolutionists just make so they can keep believing Darwin. I think we know the answer there. Reason number 3, it's tough being an evolutionist. If I was a scholar and I was promoting this and my wife said, well, honey, what are you going to teach the kids today? I really wouldn't want to tell her about this one. There's an article that says, study shows a messy human-chimp split. It's like sometimes you read about the Hollywood couple has a messy divorce or something like that. Okay. Evolutionists believe that humans evolved from chimps, then 4 million years later started mating together with chimps. That's not me saying it, it's this article and these scientists that are promoting this. Humans and chimpanzees first split up about 10 million years ago. Then after evolving in different directions for about 4 million years, they got back together again for a brief fling. I think we know what that is. That produced a third hybrid population with characteristics of both lines. I can't believe how desperate they are. Eric Lander, writing in Nature magazine online, he says, something very unusual, I'll say, happened at the time of the chimp to human speciation, said co-author David Reich. What's unusual? They say that people evolved from chimps and 4 million years later started mating together again with chimps. Harvard evolutionary anthropologist Daniel Lieberman admits it's a totally cool analysis. My problem is imagining what it would be like to have a hominid and a chimp viewing each other as appropriate mates, not to put it too crudely. I don't know, maybe they just said, hey, baby. Hey, baby. I don't know. They're the ones pushing it. Reason number 2, it's got to be tough being an evolutionist these days. It's because mutations. You see, evolution is all about information gain. So what are you talking about? Well, let's just take one of those proposed starting points, anywhere from the Big Bang to Einstein. Well, Big Bang, we've got the dust particles, and then you've got the rocks, and you've got the pond scum, and the worms, and the fish, and the amphibians, and the reptiles, the mammals, the monkeys, the men. Okay, so let's start somewhere in there, maybe like pond scum. Well, to go from pond scum, say, to Einstein, which the biology books, they like to start with the cell. Well, wouldn't you like to avoid your biggest hurdle, how non-life became living? So you won't find many pages in a biology book, right, Ron, telling you how that non-living stuff became living. So they like to start with the cell. Yeah. Well, but to go from pond scum to Einstein requires a lot of information gain. And for example, pond scum has no DNA in it for lungs, for eyes, for ears, because there wasn't anything that needed it at that stage, according to them, and fingers and anything like that. So how did that information, those are instructions. DNA is instructions. It's an instruction manual. Do this, do this, do this, do this. How did it happen? Their answer is, well, mutations. Are you kidding me? Mutations? Mutations is like throwing a hammer at your black and white TV hoping you can make a color TV out of it. I'm going to mutate that sucker, or I'm going to drive my Ford Ranger into a boulder somewhere and hope it turns into a Lincoln or something. Mutations, really? You're willing to go there? You're willing to stand behind that in a suit and tie and say you believe that mistakes is what got it here? Oh yeah, we know most of them are lethal and harmful and are neutral, but every once in a while, every gazillion years, there'll be one that'd be a little bit of an advantage for that frog or that turtle or whatever. And so he'll pass it on to his offspring, and that'll be a little bit better off, see? And then another million years, another little one will happen. Oh, he's a little bit better off than he was. And so y'all believe that's how we go from amphibians to humans, fish to philosophers? You know, really? And they do. They have to believe that. And mutations are a terrible method. For years, evolutionists have said that mutations cause the random rewriting of the DNA code. And occasionally the mutation was beneficial and then was naturally selected, and thus evolution occurred as one organism evolved into a new kind. Really. The term beneficial is highly subjective, class. It means man's opinion. Are stunted wings beneficial? I would say no. However, they actually say, well, on a windy island they would be, because you wouldn't be blown out to sea as readily. Okay, maybe on a windy island, but does the beetle think that he's better off with those little stubby wings than if he had good wings? He probably wants to be an eagle. Most mutations are neutral or lethal. A mutation is a birth defect. A mutation always results, here's the take-home lesson, always results in a loss of information. We got to have a net gain, and we're not getting it. It's illogical to go downhill for 1,000,000 steps and then up for 1 step and conclude that life has an upward urge. And then go down for 1,000,000 steps and up for 1 and so on. In addition, did you know we all have a genetic load of genetic mutations? Those are copying errors that's increasing with each generation. When your dad said he's a better man than you, actually he's kind of right. Because his generation had fewer mutations than your generation does. So watch this. This is a PG-35 slide right here. Scientists know that just one additional mutation per generation would lead to extinction, not evolution of higher forms. Current count of human gene disorders like Alzheimer's, sickle cell anemia, muscular dystrophy, spina bifida, all those systemic diseases like that is more than 13,000. Now this guy, Dr. John Morris is quoting one of those microbiologists, and that's their count. It's about 13,000 mutations. Now, me as a non-microbiologist, here's what I think. Aren't there 2 genes for every trait? The dominant and recessive usually. What a clever, redundant system. Because 99% of the time it appears that the bad gene is recessive and the other one will carry the load. And so that person may be a carrier, but they're not actually have that disease, like Alzheimer's or sickle cell anemia or something like that. What a bunch of slack he cuts us, even on the submolecular level. Now, the forecast of human gene disorders by Dr. Joseph Mastropaolo, he says this is what he's found. In 1960, the average number of gene mutations in people was 1,000. In 1970, it was 2,000. 1980, 3,500. 1990, and you can read. And his prediction is by 2085, human race will be extinct just because of the mutations. Now, I'm not saying he's right. I don't know enough to really judge that. But these are people that have studied it their whole life, and they don't have an evolutionary axe to grind. They're believers, and that's what they say. Well, it wouldn't surprise me, nor does it depress me, because we feel like that we know how this turns out. And the scientific conclusion is mutations destroy life, they don't create it. Now this man right here at age 81, Professor Anthony Flew from England, I didn't say flew from England, his name is Anthony Flew and he lives in England. Leading atheist, now believes in God. What did that? I mean, that's pretty deeply entrenched if you go 81 years. And he says, his own words, what I think the DNA material has done is show that intelligence must have been involved in getting these extraordinarily diverse elements together. Finally, and there's others that have come to that conclusion by being honest scholars. And reason number 1, I'm going to show you tonight, it's got to be tough being an evolutionist, is because of what came out 1 year ago in July of 2016, mitochondrial DNA convergence. What's this about? Well, the July of 2016 issue of Acts and Facts was where I first read this. And here's an article, DNA Trends Confirm Noah's Family. And what you see here in this article, it's small, so I'm going to blow it up for you, kind of a spidery looking diagram with a bunch of straight lines. What that is a software generated image. Sometimes technology gets ahead of software, sometimes software ahead of technology, it seems. It looks like the software caught up sufficiently to where the database of 369 mitochondrial DNA the mitochondrial DNA of 369 individuals was tested. Now, a little pause right here. 99.5% of our DNA is in the nucleus of our cells, but 0.5% is in the mitochondria, a piece of the cell. And all of you, male or female, get that from your mother's line. So they've known that since 1988, and they were able to trace the mitochondrial DNA all the way back. Let me get the date right. November of 1988, the cover story, I believe on U.S. News and World Report, or no, Newsweek, said we can trace all humanity back to a single woman from whom we've all descended. Okay, they've known that since '88, but with further refinement, they found out something that happened in between those 2 points, present and Eve. And here's what it is. Every person, every line up there, and there's 369 lines, that represents that person's DNA. Some lines are longer than others, some are shorter, and all that. But what they found was that every person DNA converged to one of 3 nodes, indicated by the blue arrows, and I made them red just in case they weren't enough for you to see them. Those are the 3 daughters-in-law of Noah. And they are only 8 pairs different between them because they were all in that generation. Now, I asked them about this one right here, and they said that's not a 4th node because that's like 20 generations away. It may be a fairly prolific family, like the Howland family, who came over on the Mayflower to this country. And I don't know, there's probably people in here besides me that are related to that John Howland, who was one of the signers of the Mayflower Compact. And he's the guy, maybe you remember, he was coming from Europe over to the New World, and they had rough seas one night, and he was tossed overboard, and on his way into the black ocean swells, he saw a rope and grabbed it and went into the water, and some of the other men saw it and ran over and grabbed the rope and pulled him out. Saved his life. He married Elizabeth Tilley, who came over on the Mayflower with her 2 parents. They both died the first winter, but she lived. She and John Howland married. They had 10 children, and they had 80 grandchildren. And because that family was so large, it did almost a similar effect as that 4th place right there. This is me talking now. Because so many people are descendants of the guy that caught the rope. If he doesn't catch the rope, you lose all of those people, me included. And my family tree shows it, and so on and so forth. My mother's, my grandmother was, her last name was Lay, from the Lay's potato chip people. And then she married a Davis, and my mother's maiden name was Davis, and then so on. And so I could show you that, but I find this fascinating because the human mitochondrial DNA tree showing the 3 central nodes, these fit the number of expected mitochondrial DNA sequences between the 3 wives of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. We don't know their names, but do you know how old Mr. and Ms. Noah were the first day of the flood? His age is given. She might have been a little bit younger, but probably not much. He was 600 years, 2 months, and 17 days old. And I always wondered, did they continue to have family at age 600? Because they'd lived to be, I think, 930. Noah did. And that says no. she was done by then, it looks like. Okay, now Jensen, the researcher's data, shows the human mitochondrial tree has 3 nodes. Thus, everyone alive today carries one of 3 unique ancestral maternal sequences. This fits Genesis' claim that all humans who exist today are descended from one of the wives of Noah's sons. And a study of 7,098 people from the oldest UN data set available revealed similar results in 2013. Folks, that is amazing. Now, here's why. Everybody in here, biologically speaking, has 2 parents. Nod if you agree. You have 4 grandparents. You have 8 great-grandparents. 16 great-great, 32 great-great-great, 64 great-great-great-great. All these doublings, right? How can that be if we've got the world record population going right now at about 7.5 billion when everybody's got this huge herd of people behind them? Well, it's not exactly like that. It is for a little bit, but then it starts converging back to 2. Well, through 8 or maybe 6 reproducing people, 3 couples, and then back to Adam and Eve. So you don't know it, but us in this room tonight probably share a 4th or 5th great grandmother, a 5th or 6th great grandfather, or something like that, or maybe further back. But it only serves to emphasize the unity of the human family. And there's a message there for believers about unity, about forgiveness, about harmony, and about all kinds of good things. But what an amazing God we have. And now this is just a few things. And in short, the article goes on to say, if all peoples descended from 3 genetically unique mothers, then number 1, our mitochondrial DNA sequences should trace back to their 3 nodes. These nodes have about 8 differences between them. They should have about 8 differences between them. And thirdly, a strict biblical timeline suggests these mitochondrial DNA trends trace all of humanity back to Noah's son's 3 wives, a striking intersection of biblical history and modern genetics. It is a great time to be a Bible-believing Christian. It is a great time. We've got confirmations coming in on all quarters. And what we're doing out there on the banks of the river is a part of that. And you are a part of that. And you coming tonight and learning this kind of stuff and seeing that encouragement is a part of that. Wow is right. Now, these 10 reasons, just a recap of what you saw tonight, were these 10 reasons right here. The Big Bang, star formation. Never seen one of them form. It would have to be 31,746 stars form every second for 20 billion years in order to get the stars that we have today. We've never seen not one of them. Shouldn't we have seen at least one form? Language, how complex. And design, points to a designer. Fossils, the transitional forms aren't there. Spontaneous generation, that's wishful thinking. Soft dinosaur tissue, shouldn't be there. Chimp to human, back to chimp. Mutations, human convergence. But there's a lot of other things. And aren't you glad there's a much better explanation for all of this? Many more reasons. These are some that could be another program. Explain how flight somehow evolved on at least 4 different occasions. Birds, insects, mammals, and reptiles. Evolutionist, sir, please explain how photosynthesis somehow evolved. Would you please explain how cold-blooded animals turned into warm-blooded animals? These cold-blooded animals with a 3-chambered heart turned into warm-blooded animals with a 4-chambered heart, and they didn't die? Explain how floating marine plants evolved into complex land plants, which y'all believe, with stems, roots, and leaf systems. Explain how bottom-dwelling marine life ended up in high elevations, even on mountaintops. Oh, you'll find that out this week. Explain how egg-laying animals developed the ability to give live birth. Explain metamorphosis, and so on. How some insects dissolve and turn into a totally different type of creature. Explain how mammals and reptiles crawl back into the sea and turn into whales, dolphins, seals, plesiosaurs, and the list goes on. Explain which came first. Here's a good one. The immune system or the need for it. Whoa. Think about that one. All right. I don't have an immune system. Here comes the disease. It's going to kill me. So since I need an immune system, I'll just evolve one. But if you have it, then, yeah, not hardly. Explain complex information sequencing like the DNA code without intelligence, because they don't allow it. They don't allow a divine foot in the door, is their quote. How does evolution explain the emergence of sexual reproduction, giving both male and female physiology would have to mutate to develop simultaneously? And what about this? Bird-like dinosaurs, like Struthiomimus, are actually lizard-hipped, while bulky, low-slung, and heavy dinosaurs, like Ankylosaurus, were bird-hipped. How do paleontologists who believe dinosaurs evolved into birds account for this unusual situation? In other words, the heavy, clunky ones, they're the ones that got the delicate bird hips, and the little delicate ones have the lizard hips. So it just thwarts them on every hand, and so on. And this is about the retrograde motion of planets and all of that. See, if a Big Bang really occurred, all of that would be spinning the same way, and all the planets would be spinning the same way. They're not. There's a retrograde. Some of them are spinning backwards, just like God is saying, no, I'm not going to let y'all have it off, get it that easy, thinking that's going to explain it. So, honey, I just don't think I can be an evolutionist anymore. It's just too hard to justify it anymore. Things really do look like they're designed.